scientist right now for the U.S. Army Information Systems Engineering Command. My degree is actually electrical and computer engineering, but every few years they have to change, in the government, they have to change the names of everything. I don't know why. But that's just one of those things that happen in the government. So I've gone from being a computer engineer to electrical engineer to a general engineer to computer scientist, and I think a couple other names through the years I've forgotten. But it's always, generally working on all sorts of different projects. So in the last 10 to 15 years, it's been almost entirely on networks, computer systems, data centers, things of that nature. But what I do here today is introduce you to what resources there are in Region 6 and in IEEE for humanitarian type projects. So, first one off the top of the list is IEEE Foundation. IEEE Foundation is to IEEE what, trying to think of a good example, what the difference. IEEE is a not-for-profit organization, and we cannot use certain monies from member dues to do certain things, such as humanitarian projects in some cases. It all depends on what's going on, where the money's going, things like that. So the IEEE stood up the IEEE Foundation, which is a totally charitable organization that takes money from anyone who wants to contribute to it and use it to support IEEE programs. And a large number of those programs they support are humanitarian programs. And they are generally big ticket priority projects that are in the millions of dollars that are broad reaching and go across the world or across a nation or into very many potential people that can profit from it. So I very, very strongly encourage you, if you're a member of IEEE and you've got some big vision project that you've got in mind that with this saying, this is what IEEE needs to be doing to help humanity with technology. That's our tagline, IEEE is advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. If you got that idea in your mind, you said, man, if I could really go and do this, this would benefit everybody in the whole world. IEEE Foundation is the place you need to go. They're the folks you need to talk to because they can fund it. And they do it every year, to the tone of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars sometimes. It all depends on what the project is and how well you sell it and pitch it to them. So I highly encourage you to do that. At least look into it if you are considering applying for grants through different sources. The IEEE Humanitarian Philanthropic Programs is just one of the things that IEEE Foundation gives toward. They fund a number of projects under this, and I'll leave you to the link there. I'm not going to say much about it, other than this is a broad program within IEEE, and there's some other people here, that, like Juliana and some others and Nuru, that can speak to it much better than I can, so I'll leave that there. Our projector is a little bit high there, so I'm going to lower that so for the benefit of everybody by the time they get up here.
Thank you.
It's cutting off everybody
Yeah, it's
there.
cutting off.
If I can get it, there it goes.
Thank you.
Perfect. The Global Humanitarian Technology Conference. This is a conference that was founded by Region 6, IEEE Region 6, and it's held every year. This is our 10th annual coming up here in 2020. It's going to be in Seattle, Washington. It's been in California and it's been in Washington so far. And it covers all the topics that are covered under the United Nations. What are those? There's like a dozen
Sustainable Development Goals.
Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you. They cover all those, and they cut everything from clean water to health benefits to good power to reliable power to you name it. All these things that people need as basic necessities. And if you have a paper or an idea that has something to do with any of those areas, this is a good place to get it presented, get it published, and get it seen by the community as a whole. So I highly encourage it. I've been to it several times. I was actually the chair of it one year. I was the technical chair the first year. It's a great technology conference, and I highly recommend it. And it's in October this year in Seattle. The SUSTEC. The reason I'm putting this one in here, SUSTEC is in Santa Ana in April, and it is geared toward all sorts of things that make sustainable technology. And the reason I put it in, it's not exactly humanitarian, but a lot of these technologies are the same things that are very applicable to humanitarian solutions and humanitarian problems. Things like power for remote locations, communications for remote locations, things that are continually available and not having to have huge infrastructure investments into and recurring things anything from solar to wind, you name it. So if you're interested in that, this is another good conference that's good there for you. And SITE, this is right up near his lane, the Special Interest Groups for Humanitarian Technologies. This is a thing within IEEE. It's a movement, if you want to call it that. It is a local and a IEEE-wide level event or group, if you want to call it that, where you can stand up and you can also apply for funding grants to go and do specific things in your own hometown, wherever it may be, or to go somewhere and do something. Anything from helping the homeless in your area to going and helping indigenous tribes to helping whoever it may be that has some humanitarian need. It's wide open for all those different things. And once again, you're going to hear a lot more about these types of things. But if you have a site group in your area, great, get involved with them. If you don't, try to find some, and you have some idea of what you'd like to do, get with a couple of other like-minded people. It's very easy to stand up a site group and then apply for funding and get support to go and help do these things. So just another resource for you. And finally, this is my last slide. People. The people within IEEE that I see that are doing these great things, those are a real resource. And when I look at across the audience here, you are that resource. If you're here and you're interested in humanitarian technologies and helping people, I can't say enough about thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And thank you to our panel here is going to discuss these things with you. And I'll leave it at that. So thank you very much and welcome and thanks for coming.
Thank you, Keith. Keith is the kind of leadership who inspires some of us, at least me, to keep doing this kind of thing because you have so much awesome support. And with that, like I said, we have a packed agenda, so I'm going to go to our first speaker here, Amy, and introduce her. Amy has a master's degree in electrical engineering and a PhD in economics, and has a strong interest in humanitarian issues. And while she was completing her PhD, she worked at Rand Corporation, Amazon, and the International Rescue Committee. With IRC, she analyzed employment data on refugees that had recently immigrated to the United States. She's currently a research analyst at the Center for Sustainable Energy in San Diego, where she focuses on electric vehicle charging infrastructure. She's the member of the IEEE HAC Projects Committee and also volunteers with the San Diego Rapid Response Network, which provides support to asylum seekers immediately after they are released from ICE detention facilities in the US. Amy has been inspiring with her work so much that she's going to talk about refugee and asylum seeker help that you can provide in especially the crisis that's happening in the US southern border. So with that, Amy, thank you for speaking. Just pull up your slides.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy. Neeru just introduced me, so thanks for having me here today. I'm excited to be here. And as Neeru mentioned, I did some volunteer work with the International Rescue Committee a couple of years ago. So that kind of was my introduction into refugee-related issues, and I've done some other volunteer work since then. So I'm just going to go through and talk a little bit about some of the things I've learned through doing that volunteer work and kind of touching on some ideas that I've found where IEEE might be able to contribute to this area. And just want to put a plug out there right now that we're really always looking for more ideas too. So if this kind of sparks any ideas for anyone, please come talk to me after. So first I'll talk a little bit about just the resettlement process, a little bit of background for those who haven't been familiar with this before. The IRC, International Rescue Committee, is one of 9 resettlement agencies. Sorry, these words are really small on here. But basically, when refugees come into the United States, they've gone through kind of a vetting or screening process through the UN, and then the State Department provides funding to one of these resettlement agencies, and they help support them for the first 90 days that they're here. So that's kind of their initial resettlement phase. So an agency like IRC will help them find housing, get them a social security card. If they need to go to the doctor, help them with that. Just lots of paperwork. People who aren't from the US are not always familiar with like the massive amount of paperwork that is involved with everything we do here. So there's a lot of little things that they kind of help out with. And as you can imagine, 90 days is not a ton of time to kind of acclimate yourself to a brand new country. You may not even speak the language very well, if at all. So these agencies do also continue to try and provide services to help integrate folks into society beyond the 90 days. At that point, of course, it becomes optional. They only kind of have a mandate to help people for the 90-day window. But places like IRC will get grants and donations to provide additional services. And when I was interning there, I worked with what was called the asset building team. And actually one of the programs we did, which I thought was really cool, was providing kind of low interest car loans for folks, because when they come to the US, people don't have a FICO score, and then it becomes very difficult to get any kind of loan. But as you can imagine, most places where you live in the US, you kind of need a car. It's really helpful if you want to go to work, if you have a car. So I felt like that was a very impactful program, and I was proud to be a part of that. And I also kind of just did some data gathering for them. They didn't have a lot of data-centric folks there, so I was happy to help out with just kind of pulling data together on some of these various programs. But basically, there's a lot of services out there, but one of the issues I noticed as I was there was that you don't really know what happens to all the refugees. You don't track them beyond the initial 90 days, and so some people come and take advantage of these courses or trainings and programs, and some don't. And of course, since there's different agencies, they don't all cross-communicate really at all. Like, someone might have been resettled through Jewish Family Services and then take a course at IRC, but then you don't have any way to measure, impacts across time because you're not seeing that person's whole picture. So one thing that I got to learn about, I went to Germany actually last summer, was some of the German IEEE groups have started a mobile app called Integrate that kind of gathers together a lot of data that's tailored to local areas, and it's provided by local NGOs or groups.
Sorry to stop you. Can you just elaborate this audience about why you were in Germany and what it was about?
Sure, yeah.
I don't think they know.
Sorry, I'll back up 1 second. Yeah, last summer in Germany, the German site group put together a kind of workshop for refugee-related issues, so I went to that since I was kind of embarking on this path. And the German and Colombian sections were well represented there, and they both were very interested since they have a lot of refugee populations in their own country. And this was one of the coolest projects that I learned about at that workshop, so I wanted to share. And this is something that, to my knowledge, is not in the US, but it's an app that it's hard to see because this is a screenshot and it's very tiny, but you can kind of select different categories. So that screenshot on the left is various categories, and then you could select, for example, everyday life, and then this column on the right, if you select bicycle, it's kind of telling you rules of the road for bicycling. Like if you're not from Germany, it says, you need to ride on the right side of the road, and just kind of some basic daily living things that you might not be aware of that might be different in your home country. So that's something that the Colombian section was trying to work on, and hopefully it may roll out to other sections as well. And then I want to switch gears a little bit and talk specifically about asylum seekers. So what I was talking about with resettlement was for refugees who've gone through this UN vetting process. And these processes have been in place for a long time. These resettlement agencies in the US, as I'm mentioning, there's kind of some gaps as far as data and service integration, but they're pretty well set up to take care of folks. And of course, in the US, infrastructure is pretty good, basically. I mean, it's not too hard for them to find housing and that kind of thing. But there's kind of new issues that have arisen in the past year or 2 years with a lot of asylum seekers that are coming to the US. And a lot of it stems from kind of recent changes brought on by our current administration. So they've tightened up a lot of requirements. They've made things kind of more difficult for some of the ways that people can enter as asylum seekers into the United States. One issue that happened not this last October, but the one before, was that, like 5 minutes, okay. There was something called the Safe Release Program from ICE, Immigration Customs, where when someone was released from the detention center, like the customs agency would help them get to their sponsor. Like that person would have a sponsor in the United States who they're going to stay with as their case is being processed. And that program was ended, so what happened was people were just released onto the streets. This happened in San Diego, and I believe in many other border towns as well. So some of these resettlement agencies who hadn't really been set up to deal with this suddenly very quickly mobilized and created shelters where these folks could stay. So that was, a challenge, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Another recent change was this Remain in Mexico policy, where folks coming up from Central America or other countries who've gotten to the Mexico-US border are now needing to stay in Mexico. And this is true even for some nationalities such as Cubans, who historically had had a very easy time entering the US just because of some previous legislation that already existed. So this is something that's impacting a lot of folks. And as you can imagine, these border towns in Mexico, like Tijuana, also were not really set up to deal with this. So this is where we're seeing a lot of the needs right now. So here's a few ways that I've kind of found throughout my volunteering that I think there's space where IEEE could potentially help out. So one issue, this is just kind of a big picture, very high level idea, but this issue of finding space, like either housing or somewhere, some kind of lodging for refugees or asylum seekers where there's sudden influx of, a large number of folks. This is something, so as Nir mentioned too in my bio, I volunteer at this place called the Rapid Response Network, and they set up a shelter for the people who are being released from ICE onto the streets of San Diego. That shelter got set up very quickly, and in the space of just over a year, they've had to relocate, I think, 5 or 6 times. So that's an issue where they're constantly kind of scrambling to find space, but you kind of need a lot of resiliency in terms of the space, the size of the space that you need would be changing often. Here's just a picture I grabbed from offline, but this looks very similar to the shelter that I volunteer at in San Diego. So there's cots set up, and they have meals provided for folks. So the infrastructure exists, but it's just kind of always a race to find a space that they can use. Another issue is just matching people with pro bono legal services. Obviously, folks don't have cash to pay for a lawyer when they've just arrived as an asylum seeker in the US. And this is a screenshot of a website that exists right now. But what I want to highlight is it's relatively simplistic, and I feel like there's areas for growth maybe here. You can click on a state, and it will show you a PDF in English of the pro bono services that are available. So that's a step towards helping match people, but I feel like there's more technology can do to maybe add to that and facilitate that for people. And then another thing I want to talk about here is the needs in Tijuana. So this is a picture of a shelter that I visited in Tijuana, Mexico. It's called La Iglesia Embajadores de Jesus. And sorry, my Spanish accent is really bad. But it's a church, and they're housing currently over 200 migrants. So I'm actually in the process of writing a proposal for a site project to put a solar and storage system on this church, because they do have electricity, but it's kind of spotty and it's hard for them to pay their bills. When I was there, they keep the lights really dim, and they have 1 refrigerator, 1 washer dryer for over 200 folks that are living there currently. So they really could benefit from more electricity, cheaper electricity. So I'm working on that, and if people want to talk about that after, please come and let me know, because we're looking for volunteers. Just a couple other pictures of the shelter, like the conditions there. This is kind of how they cook and store their water. And this picture on the left is the schedule for charging cell phones. So you can see that the electricity is somewhat limited, but they have to kind of ration out that usage for people to charge their phones, and they don't have a landline there, so people do need their cell phones to communicate. And yeah, so now I rushed to the end, but that is it. And any questions?
Yeah, we can take one question now, and then we'll have some time at the end for the whole panel.
Yeah.
How do you see this, especially your app and other things, dealing with a scenario of a rapid response to, say, a natural disaster or something that results in a large influx of refugees from, you see it in Europe and other things.
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't given that a ton of thought, but I think it's very similar issues. I mean, the bigger picture issue that I'm thinking about is when you have large fluctuations in number of folks that need shelter and other things kind of on a temporary basis. So we need to have sort of like a peer plan solution for...
Rico, was it recently got hit by hurricanes?
Puerto Rico, yeah.
Yes, yeah, there's probably a lot of this type of, like, something like the app, or if we figure out, I didn't really flesh out a solution here, but some kind of solution to, like, temporary housing that's really scalable at a fast pace, we would be applicable to not just refugees, but a wide range of issues, for sure. Yeah, you want to wrap it up? Okay, I'll take more questions later.
Yeah, we can take more questions later. Thank you. I always learn so much from Amy. So I'll go ahead and introduce David Gonzalez here. He's a graduate of Cali Poly Sonoma. Night School, where he has a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. He earned his MBA from the University of Redlands Whitehead College of Business. He's finished the coursework for the Naval Postgraduate School in the Master of Science Management program. And he has worked in the aerospace industry, Department of Defense, and the U.S. Navy in his 25-year career. Through his work within the U.S. Navy, Mr. Gonzalez has worked in the areas of methodology and research and development projects that have involved the Joint Armed Forces. David was recommended by Tim Lee, the region director, as somebody who can speak to us about issues that happen with veterans, especially veterans who are homeless and on the streets. And I'm getting so educated by David about what can be done and what are the real issues. So, with that, just.
How you doing? And a lot of things of what Amy was talking about leads in well with, like, for example, San Diego. While she getting that ready, there's a lot of homelessness in San Diego. Now, think about compounding the issues of now having to deal now with folks who are looking somewhere to stay that are coming over from the border and need help. So things are especially for San Diego, has not been easy. But thank you, Nudie, for that introduction. So I am the chair of an ad hoc committee through IEEE USA, which is called the U.S. Government Communities of Interest. And what I work for is the Navy. I've been there for almost 20 years. Worked in industry prior to that. So one of the things I've seen about, I've worked a lot with veterans and dealing with some veterans issues, and I have family members that are veterans also. So not only at a personal level, but also as a working level, and also seeing and looking around at the different places I've been through in the United States, and looking at the data that backs us up. It's very interesting what we have in our country. Our veterans are a very undervalued group in our society. And but let me talk to you a little bit about what USGCO is all about. This is our mission and vision, what we want to do. We basically are a group of folks through IEEE USA, and I say IEEE USA just because we're doing with the U.S. government. We put a corral around what IEEE is, so we're not talking about the 440,000 members that make up IEEE globally. We're talking about the 200,000 or so that are in the U.S. So our mission is to just help folks like myself that are IEEE members that work in the government, the federal government, and also that include contractors. So I'm a civil servant, includes all your armed forces, civil servants, and contractors. U.S. contractors that work with the government, U.S. federal government. So that's a group. Now, the overall structure of what USGCO is what I'm going to talk about a little bit. So here are our goals. I mean, you can read it. I don't want to read it for you, but it's basically what we want to do is create a community in which we have folks from different parts of different federal agencies that can talk to each other. Believe it or not, that's one of the hardest things to do in the government. Even with the Navy, there's 3 parts of the Navy and the Marine Corps. So it's hard for me to even talk to one fellow Navy person that's at another base, other than the intranet that we have, which is called NMCI. It's terrible. But so imagine having to only be able to talk to somebody by phone or by email. It's limited on what you can do, short of going and seeing them face to face. So this is how the USGCO, I've got a little animation so you guys can stay with here. And so what it was is I figured, well, why can't I just talk to my brethren Navy folks that are at the next base over? It just, the way the government's set up is not set, surprising, it's not set up to be efficient. So I thought, well, even with my base, it's sort of funny. We have, if you leave your lights on, they'll send an email out to everybody on the base to say, hey, you left your lights on, or you left your sunglasses. And this I can command everybody. But if, let's say I say, hey, can I send an email out to see who on base is an engineer that's an IEEE member? Oh, you can't do that. I should have legal sit in on say, you can't do that. So this is where the common sense doesn't really exist in the government too much. Your sunglasses are recorded. All right, so what I looked at is, as an umbrella organization, this is what USGCOI, the U.S. Government Communities of Interest is. This is based on something that my day job, I work with something called Government Industry Data Exchange Program. The long word basically is a way for industry in the U.S. to share information with the government and the government share information with industry. And that's on component parts and manufacturing, counterfeit parts, et cetera, et cetera. So taking that as an idea, which has been going on for the last 15 years, I said, well, why can't we do this here? So where it starts at is with you all. So it's not from a top-down type of structure. It's from a bottom-up. So if I have fellow members that I know and we have a special interest, like I do project management. So I can talk to other people that are doing project management that don't have to be within the Navy or the federal government, U.S. citizen though. And because I've done it so long, we can start having like a check, which is one of the best ways to say it. So what it does is set up with our organization, we'll go and they'll submit to the steering committee, executive committee, that we want to start a group within this umbrella. Everybody's vetted. In other words, you just don't come in and say, hey, here we are. And we got to check you out, make sure you're okay. We don't want trolling. We don't want bad things to happen within this environment. Then under that, you can create many other groups under that. In fact, a group can have its own group, subgroup. So that it's a structured type of way to organize groups. Now, get to why the veterans issues and even with what you're trying to do, Amy, might help. Again, it's under IEEE USA. And then even as an individual, let's call him Hank. He wants to join also, but he knows nobody, but he's does project management. Well, what's the advantage of him growing, connecting with something like that? Well, now you have a specific demographics in which you're talking to people that are like-minded and have the same interests and different levels of experience. So I've done this for a long time, so let's say someone that's a beginning project manager, and I'm just using project manager as an example, wants to know the lessons learned that you're not going to find in a textbook. Within the chat group, you can, and it's monitored by the way, you have a moderator, we can help each other out. I worked in joint services for the Army, Air Force, and I represented the Navy, Marine Corps. It was hard to get everybody to talk on the same level or the same way. It took a while, but it was good. But by the time I was done, I had a lot more respect for the Army and the Air Force. And we got a lot more done working together, which would not have ever happened unless there was an environment in which we can do it. Not that it was done here, it was done through the biochemical warfare project I was working on, and I was a technical lead. So it's from that, again, Hank has to be vetted also. We can also choose to get rid of a group if they're not acting right. Okay? That can be a person too. So this is the way to monitor so that we don't, because with the government, the one thing we're concerned about is security. Okay? So that's why when we talk about any kind of these chat groups, if it's government, it has to be unclassified. That's why we have to have somebody monitoring it so if it gets classified, and we're taught with how to deal with classified information. Hey, you can't talk about that. You have to keep it general. So I'm not going to talk about weapon systems, latest greatest things that I know I can't share with anybody. So that's why it's, in the sense, the way it's a federal government, like-minded people. So again, we're looking, and now we're connected to veterans issues. Not all veterans are IEEE members. Some are. This is where we have an exception, which we're trying to do, because we started thinking, well, do they have to be IEEE members? No, because this is very versatile. It's like a Swiss knife. So what Amy's wanting to do, here's where not just the armed services, but any U.S. federal agency can talk to other federal agencies to coordinate within this environment to get things done. Cut through the crap, let's just talk to each other to get it done. Okay? And the thing is, it's in a secure environment. So we deal with, I do cybersecurity. So we have basically in simple terms, is we have a militarized type of safe zone in which people can talk. Okay? And they can share information, and not anybody can get in. So you're not going to get hacked in, and we're not going to be having people that we don't know in our chat. So it's like a chat group on steroids, and militarized. So this slide's it's interesting, it's funny, but then it gets to a point. This is called the known soldier. Many times we, have Memorial Day, and this year's going to be November 11th, 2020. And so we pay homage to the unknown soldier, the soldier that died for us, for our freedom. But we step over the ones we do know, at least in the streets. If you read a sign, it says, you see, hello, anyone? It says homeless, suicidal, and suffering from PTSD. Not to say there are people out there that are faking it, but there are, especially in San Diego, it's a big area with the military, a lot of homeless veterans, and throughout the country. And I'll show you a little bit. California has the highest amount of homeless veterans in the country. So PTSD, you know what it means? It's post-traumatic stress disorder. So what that is that it's a lot of folks and veterans that they've been interviewed, they wish they would have gone down with their buddies because they're living a hell now. Because they come back, and I know this firsthand working with a lot of veterans, you have to treat veterans that are in the workforce a little bit different than your run-of-the-mill person. Because there's a lot of times different grades of PTSD that they're dealing with. And just with the brain, this is a good little graphic here. More military deaths by suicide. It's been increasing over the last 10 years. Okay? 300,000 veterans from the Iraq and Afghani war have been diagnosed with PTSD. And those are the ones that actually get to VA and get to be diagnosed. There's a higher number that's not even represented here that never get to their VA appointment and never get anything done. Again, more graphics. PTSD is now the third highest ranking VA claim that's out there. Tinnitus is just ringing in the ear, by the way. So, I know it's a lot to go through. Let me tell you. So, this is a pointed picture here, in which this guy actually had his military ID out. He's homeless. And he has his fatigues on in his backpack, just looking for handouts. So, it's sad for us as Americans, I think, a sad commentary on where we're at. And I'm sorry to bring you guys down. But again, homeless issues are the biggest thing in California, once again, that I'm from. That's the highest number is in California. Now, the homeless people, 43% are homeless vets. And this is getting closer now to over 200,000 now. And then suffering from mental illness. Again, the darker portions are higher percentages. There we go. Okay, so going back to PTSD. The brain, and I have a medical background too. Before I became an engineer, I was actually a respiratory therapist at pre-med, so I worked in hospitals too before this. So I saw a lot of very traumatic brain injuries. And I worked in a psych ward and also the neuro ward, the neurology ward, where people had head injuries. But basically what it is, even if you go, for example, soldiers are trained to have their helmet on when they're in combat. High velocity bullets can graze a helmet, but what most people don't know is your brain is basically floating in a bath of cerebral spinal fluid in your skull. And so your spinal column too. So if a bullet grazes your head and your helmet, the concussive force of that sound wave is enough to splash your brain around in your skull. Most people don't know that, but so that even if you don't get hit by a bullet, it can still cause long-term damage. It gets worse with time. So these are the various parts of PTSD, and there's a lot of other issues, but I'm just focusing on PTSD. Suicidal tendencies, anxiety disorders, phobias, don't like to be around crowds, obsessive compulsive disorders, and again, traumatic brain injury, and addiction. So addiction is something that sort of goes hand in hand. Veterans that otherwise would not be addicted to drugs because of PTSD end up using drugs. A lot of it's marijuana to try to get off, the pain, the chronic pain they have, but more of them get into heavier drugs. That's some more alcohol and drug abuse. That's a sequela or secondary effect of these post-traumatic disorders. Again, suicide rate is up compared to the civilian population. Veterans, the population in general. So you can see the numbers are showing there's a very poor tendencies for veterans to survive a lot of what's going on here. And by the way, if anybody's interested, I can make these slides available to anybody who's interested after we're done. And again, I like comics, but even with that, this is what I like this one. I can still hear the scream of agony, friends dying all around me, hope of rescue waiting for each passing day. Wow, the VA hospital sounds horrible. And it's funny, but I actually had friends that worked in the VA hospital. No critique against VA hospitals. It's just been a chronic problem that's hard to solve. And a lot of times, I hear Uncle Sam with the same problem. That's where, if those of you who were sitting on Russ's presentation about policy and making an effect in DC, this is where you can make a difference, because understanding this can help our veterans. And I like this. It's a part of the war rooms he has is actually his VA coverage. Okay. And then part of what we're going to do is for this is through the structure we have is allow a chat group for folks and veterans who suffer from PTSD, where we can have a safe environment in which they can chat and talk, because it's part of the therapies that for veterans can have. And how the structure will be where IEEE. I'm running out of time, I'm sorry. And again, there's Hank again, there's a vet. And so, really quickly, I want to get through this because you're a lot of students. Sorry, I'm over my time. One thing we started with this, and we're on our second year, we've done a lot as an ad hoc committee. We started a student volunteer program, which now we're starting our second cadre. So what it is, you don't have to physically be there. You can be from a student from any university and apply to be part of the cadre. It's a 6-month cadre, a group of students, and you're there helping our senior folks who are working different parts of setting up this USGCO. So that a couple things happen. At the end of 6 months, you get a letter of recommendation from IEEE and signed by me, other folks, which is good for whatever you want to do as a student. Also gives you experience to make connections with senior folks within the government and contractors. Okay? Come to me later so I can give you some information you want. And so the first group cadre of students love it. In fact, if we see you have a potential, we will let you stay on for another 6 months, but then you become a student leader. Okay? So for those of you students that have like required hours you need to do for volunteer work and you can't get to anything, this is a good place to get it. So see me after if you want to find out some more info. And some areas to get there. Okay. Thank you. Because I went over, I can't take questions, but after you come up and talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. That was actually really educational for me. And I didn't even know the suicide rates were so much higher than they are. It's not about trying to get folks down, but really educate folks about the issues. So I'll quickly move because we still have a packed agenda to Adam, who is going to be an equally good speaker like Amy and David, and I want to make sure he gets done. So briefly introducing Adam, he's the Vice President of Grid Alternatives, which is an NGO based out of Oakland. And he is the VP of Advanced Philanthropic Partnerships that promote a culture of philanthropy. In 2018, he founded the Tribal Solar Accelerator Fund, a tribal-led initiative that provides new funding to tribes to support their renewable energy goals and GRID's first grant-making project. Adam is a certified fundraising executive, a certified naturalist from the University of California, and is currently pursuing an executive certificate in nonprofit leadership from Harvard. Adam holds a bachelor's degree from St. Olaf, a master's degree from Columbia, and 2 master's degrees in educational policy and sociology from Stanford University, where he serves at the board of directors of Stanford Alumni Association. That's where I met Adam, so I'm so excited to have Adam here present. Thank you, Adam.
And while she's loading that, I'll confess that obviously I'm a little bit of a fish out of water up here. I'm trained as a social scientist, talking to a bunch of engineers, so please don't ask me any math questions. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I do in the organization that I work for, and also focus a little bit about the opportunities that we have working with tribal communities. And in lieu of questions at the end, I'm going to share a 2-minute video, so I'll get right started. So yes, I work for Grid Alternatives. We are the nation's largest nonprofit solar installer and job training organization, and our vision is a transition to renewable energy that includes everybody. And by everyone, we mean absolutely everybody. And our mission is to make renewable energy technology and job training accessible to frontline communities. We define that frontline community in several different ways, and we have several different impact measures that we track that we call our triple bottom line. So the first is people, and serving the front lines of racism and social justice. The second is planet, serving on the front lines of environmental justice and climate change. And the third is the front lines of economic opportunity for communities that need it. We were founded in 2001. We have 9 offices across the US. We have 44 tribal partners, 3 international sites, and 400 employees as an organization. So as I mentioned, we have a triple bottom line of people, planet, and employment, and so the work that we do, we can measure our impacts in a variety of ways. On the people front, we can measure them in a variety of things like households served, the number of community facilities that we've installed solar on, and the lifetime savings, of course, that is generated from the technology that we deploy. I should note that all of these numbers are in real time. I pulled them this morning from our website. If you go to goodalternatives.org, you can click refresh and you'll see as we do this work how our impacts increase. On the planet front, we can measure these in a variety of ways as well. So we measure them in sort of the energy that is produced from the solar systems that we deploy. We can measure those also in things like tons of greenhouse gas emissions, trees planted, cars taken off the road, and other ways. And so certainly there's an environmental benefit to the work that we do as well. And then for the, so while we're installing solar, we like to call this sort of the classroom on the roof. So we're not a solar company that's gonna come in and do this very quickly and then get out of the community. We're gonna go in, we're gonna train people, we're gonna teach them about the technology, we're gonna give them hands-on field-based learning experiences while we do it, and that's part of our model. And so people, we've served over 30,000 people in the projects that we've done. We can measure that in the number of job training hours, and then also we work with other organizations in the field doing work that we do for job training partnerships. So we've installed more than 12,000 systems since 2001, since our organization started. This map sort of shows you sort of the geographic spread. We're largely based in California and the East Coast, and a lot of the tribal work we do is sort of the middle part of the country there. So tribal energy access is something that I'm very passionate about, and it's really been a pleasure to be a part of the work that GRID is doing. So we have kind of 2 elements to our work. The first is our GRID tribal program, and so they're going to Native American reservations and communities across the country, and they're doing the same work where we're installing the solar system, we're training people in the community about the technology and how to maintain it, and we're also trying to advance their energy sovereignty goals and the goals that the tribes have. So we partner with them closely, and we go out there to the tribes, we go to where they're at, and we do the work with them. Also, as Nira mentioned, I founded the Tribal Solar Accelerator Fund, and this is a philanthropic initiative where we're trying to fundraise and attract funding that can both provide the direct project support that we're involved with, but also to support tribes in their renewable energy goals, even when we're not the installer ourselves. And so that's kind of across the country. So I'm a tribal member, and so I just wanted to share this with you because it's very personally passionate for me. I'm a member of the Lakota Sioux tribe in South Dakota. This is my family's namesake. This is Badwound, and as you probably caught, my last name is Badwound. And so this is, I'm a descendant of this person. This is how I got my last name. This is my family namesake. I found this photo in the Library of Congress archives, which was really fun to discover. And you might see it says Badwound Sioux on the caption of the photo. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of share the personal connection that I have to this work because it's something, of course, I'm really passionate about. So there's a lot of opportunity in working with Native American tribes. You don't really need to see the metrics on this graph, but what you can see here is that the cost of solar has, over the last decade, significantly gone down. And there's a lot of opportunity that comes with the ability of that market to reach new areas and to be extended into communities that would otherwise be left out of the renewable energy transition. And so with the cost coming down, that means that we can do more for the money that we raise. This is also kind of a really cool map here too, because what you'll see, this is from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. The American Indian land comprises about 2% of the US land base, but that represents about 5% of the US renewable energy generation potential. And so what you see here is actually tribes have a kind of disproportionate advantage in the renewable energy space. And when do Native Americans really have any kind of advantages like that? I think it's pretty special. So there's a lot of opportunity, and what you'll see here in the map is certainly a lot of the renewable energy solar opportunity is in the western part of the United States where we have a lot of work. So our Grid Tribal program, this is again the installation team. So they've installed 734 systems, 5 megawatts of solar with $31 million plus in savings, over 100,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions prevented, and more than 1,600 people have been trained in our programs. It was founded in 2010. The systems produce 75 to 90% energy savings for the tribes. And it's really special that we can do this work at no cost to the tribes. So we come in and we train them and we provide the technology. But that's my job, is to fundraise for it. And so that way that the financial cost to the tribes is actually completely free. Our Tribal Solar Accelerator Fund, so this is the fundraising work that I'm doing to try and make more of these projects happen. And our vision for this work is a transition to energy sovereignty that is educational, entrepreneurial, and completely renewable. So we have a variety of different programs that we're launching. The first is the educational piece, and we're partnering with the American Indian College Fund to provide scholarships for students in tribal colleges and universities that have interests in renewable and environmental fields of study. Entrepreneurial, we're just about to announce the fellows that we've selected for our Tribal Energy Innovators Fellowship Program, and we really want to encourage entrepreneurs to create innovative ideas for tribal renewable energy projects. And then also we provide direct funding for these projects by providing grants to tribes for their own projects, even when we're not directly involved as the installer. Anyway, so that's a little bit about the work there, a little bit of visual here so you can see that some of the tribal people that we've worked with here. I did not bring any business cards, unfortunately, so this is my contact information. If you'd like to learn more about this work, please reach out to me. And I also want to say thank you to IEEE for the opportunity to share a little bit more about this work. We're very thankful to be a funding partner with IEEE, and so as an NGO extension of the good work that you do, I'm just really thankful to have the opportunity to partner with IEEE. They're specifically funding a project in Arizona with the San Carlos tribe through the IEEE Smart Villages program. So anyway, thank you for hearing what I had to share, and I'm gonna we'll just watch a quick video. I thought would just kind of bring us to that tribal space and share a little bit more about our work.
I also want to say that those who are from IEEE PES, GRID's whole thing is actually through IEEE PES. So if you're interested, come talk to Adam or me. The Smart Village and IEEE PES have taken the lead there.
I've lived all my life in Roseland. Here on the reservation, 45% of our people are unemployed. In the wintertime, it gets around 80%. And when they raise the electrical rate, it becomes a burden to a lot of people. And every dollar that we spend for this energy that comes from the outside world, that dollar goes away. If we spend that dollar here and make that electricity here, that dollar can stay here and spin around a little bit and help our economy grow.
My name is Wyatt Atkinson. I'm an enrolled member of the Fort Pitt tribes in northeastern Montana. Grid Alternatives is the nation's largest nonprofit solar installer. Their mission is not only to install in underserved communities, it's also the volunteer training, the workforce development.
I'm originally from here, Rosewood, South Dakota. What we're doing here with Grid is we're actually bringing job opportunity training so people can actually take this idea and run with it. Solar Corps is a year-long fellowship, and we learn the construction, the teaching, and the training side to bring people together to actually bond a community. We're actually working on a tribal member's house with the solar. It'll cut her bill in half, and she won't have to struggle anymore.
So working with all the Solar Corps, we're all from different nations all across the United States. We are leading the perspective shift. 20, 30 years down the line, I hope that every single one of us is working towards energy sovereignty in our own nation.
My goal is to finish my fellow year and gain enough experience and knowledge to bring back to my tribe.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was, as usual, amazing. I've heard Adam before, so I'm so glad he could come here to speak to us. And next up, we have another amazing speaker. Let me just introduce you, Mario. So Marielle, very inspirational. She's the CEO of MuralNet, coordinating deployments, partnerships, and policy advocacy efforts. She has taken part in every aspect of builds, from applying for licenses and funding to staging and mounting equipment. As an engineer, educator, and researcher, she has pushed for innovation in STEM classrooms through project-based service learning for over a decade. Her work in online math curriculum proved how important access to internet resources are for the content as well as mindsets. Because of this, Marielle strives to make internet accessible for all students. Thank you, Marielle. Prior to her work in education, she designed and tested medical devices to treat strokes, recyclable replacements for, I forget to pronounce this, and more efficient methods of producing photochemicals at scale. Marielle earned 2 degrees in engineering from UC Berkeley, wow, and a master's at Stanford in curriculum studies and teacher education. So, thank you, Marielle. Thank you.
The most blue gold I ever wore was in grad school when I was at Stanford, so you're always loyal to your undergrad. Thank you folks for having me here. I want to tell you our story at MuralNet because it's something that could easily happen with the people in this room. MuralNet, we're a nonprofit, but we were basically a group of friends who were volunteering and figured out a hack, if you will, about how to bridge the digital divide in tribal lands. So I'll tell you that story, and what I want you folks to do is actually kind of picture yourself. Can you see yourself doing something like this? So back in 2017, back in Sepia Tones, I suppose, is when we started. And what we did is we were talking, we're looking at the connectivity barriers, specifically with the Havasupai tribe and basically any sort of tribal lands that are very far and remote. The Havasupai tribe live at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. You either do an 8-mile hike in, or you take the helicopter, but the helicopter only runs on Thursdays, Fridays, and Sundays. So, for example, if I missed the helicopter like I did a few weeks ago, I get to take an 8-mile walk down into the canyon carrying a 60-pound pack. Again, picture yourself. How many people would be into that? Oh, wow. So when looking at the barriers, one of them first off was the network management software, those types of things. And what we did is we started working, one of our friends was working on a project to make that open source. So imagine what used to be $100,000 and only major carriers could possibly have this type of software can now be downloaded off of GitHub. So bam, that was one thing that we covered. Infrastructure around this time was also getting cheap. You're getting off-the-shelf carrier-grade equipment that was coming to the US. So now your cells got a lot cheaper, and not only that, a lot lighter, which is nice when you're carrying everything in a pack. Backhaul is an issue, mostly, it's still an issue in Indian country in the US, but it's definitely more of an issue for our sister organizations in, say, Southeast Asia or in Africa. What's interesting about backhaul in the US is there's actually a lot of it laid down. Back in 2012, Obama sponsored what's called the E-rate program. And what a lot of folks did is they went ahead and built those fiber networks subsidized by the federal government. You have the major providers, you have local ISPs. We also have people that have been working in this space for decades, such as Matt Rantanen, who you get to hear from later, Danae Wilson of Nez Perce Tribe, and Valerie Fasthorse of Coeur d'Alene. These are all folks who have been able to learn how to work this system, how to get government funds, and how to connect at least the backhaul into Indian country. And then there's spectrum access. I thought this was hilarious. Aside from money, what is some of the biggest challenges or struggles of your WISP? Number one is trees. And the second, though, is spectrum access. And that's something that's real. And what we did is we actually went through all the spectrum that's available in the US and found a sliver in the 2.5 gigahertz range that was prime real estate for rural deployments. can go pretty far with great throughput. It can penetrate through trees. And most importantly, it's been forgotten about since the 90s. So licenses were frozen in the 90s. It was called Educational Broadband Service Spectrum. Only schools could hold the licenses, and they were free. And essentially what happened is it was so forgotten about, the power limits were off the charts. You can have things scream out 40 watts. Meanwhile, with unlicensed spectrum, it's limited to 1 watt. So you can really crank up the volume, which is great in your rural areas. So we put these things together in 2017. We had the open source software, Magma. We had the buy-sells equipment, and also antennas were pretty cheap too. A local ISP called Niles Radio Communications already had backhaul to the mesa right above Supai. And again, we were able to work a backdoor way through the FCC to get access to that frozen spectrum. So we were able to do this, and it's a pretty simple situation. We have the backhaul, literally get that into an Ethernet port, plug in the base station, direct the sector antenna towards the homes, and that was about it. I don't know why this is such a small font. I feel like it should be bigger. The LTE equipment and installation, it cost less than $15,000 at the time. Actually less than $10,000 because Niles Radio Communication refused to give us a bill for all the stuff that we borrowed. Cables, whatnot. The legal costs, however, were $25,000. The LTE equipment installation, it took half a day. I took 1 sick day. I flew in to Las Vegas right after work. I rented the fastest car I could, the Dodge Challenger. Well, I mean, come on, right? Went down Route 66, onto dirt roads, yes, in a Dodge Challenger. And we worked for about half a day on that mesa, getting the equipment up. It's probably one of the best work days of my life. Turned around, came back, walked straight into work. Didn't realize I was wearing the same clothes still. So if you do this and you don't tell them where you've been, bring a change of clothes. So with that service, what they were able to do is they were able to get the stuff into student homes. They were able to get great network performance. But what we found later is that it wasn't an issue of the tech. The tech was actually pretty trivial. And for the last 2 years, it's really been about the legal access to the spectrum. Councilman Ophelia Wadahamaji Corliss spearheaded a campaign on Capitol Hill and also with the FCC to really get access to that spectrum. One reason why was because our backdoor access to the spectrum license was through special temporary authorization, and the FCC told us that whether or not she gets a permanent license for her people was going to depend on whether, when they opened up licensing for the EBS, the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, whether or not they're going to have something called a tribal priority window. So what that meant, first off, some stats. One cell, $15,000, which by the way would now cost me $8,000. It was able to cover most of the town of Supai, the village. And interestingly here, with these models, it doesn't quite capture what happens. These homes actually have some of the best connectivity. However, I have to take the radios that are on the houses and turn them 180 degrees away from the transmitter, and what's happening is a bank shot off the canyon walls straight to the homes. There's one house that we can't seem to get, and we've decided sorry man, we don't know what karma is, but the canyon walls are not taking care of you like it's taking care of everyone else.
Run a wire.
Probably good. What we're actually going to do is do a point-to-point to here, and then just take small cells and shoot them in either direction. So that'll also up their capacity. They're also putting in a new clinic, so telemedicine will be possible. And also, Supai is one of the most beautiful places in the world. They have some famous falls. They want to bring connectivity down here, the campgrounds. And the reason why is because people take wonderful pictures down there, and those tourists, all 30,000 of them a year, would love to be able to upload those on Instagram. So let them, at hotel rates, right? Many ways to sustain your business model and your network. Not everything has to be an ISP. So that was all very short, but if you look at this timeline, you can see that there's a long time you have to do to build a relationship with the tribe. That took about 10 months. The only thing that was slower was the FCC, but governments tend to be that way. The good news is it ended up happening that we got the tribal priority window. So what that means is starting February 3rd, There are 503 tribal lands that have available spectrum for them, and if they get in their applications by August 3rd, they get that spectrum for free. To understand how much of an issue this is, or how much of an opportunity that is the last spectrum auction, I believe, raised $11 billion. So it's really through, the turning point I saw was back in February of this year. The word from the inside folks we had in the FCC was that the tribal priority window and an educational priority window wasn't going to happen. And then Ophelia Wadamahaji Corliss, she met with the entire Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, and she sat down and told her story, and the story of her folks, and what broadband would mean, what it would mean for distance learning. Their school only went up to the 8th grade. If someone wanted to pursue high school, they would have to leave their home that they know. They would have to go to a boarding school hundreds of miles away. And guess what? That's really hard for a 14-year-old. Heck, it's really hard for an 18-year-old. I'm 42, it's still hard.
Can they be licensed that far?
Oh yes, they can lease it. There's build-out requirements, there's all sorts of things, and this is where we can use your folks' help. And let me fast forward a little bit. But basically there's this huge opportunity. So in this huge opportunity, we campaigned for it. They have to meet certain build-out requirements. For the first half of that year, till August 3rd, what we are about is getting as many people to get that licensing as possible. So what that means is outreach. We're doing state-by-state presentations. We're paying for travel fees so folks can come. Because the tribes that can afford it the most are the ones that are probably the least likely to be able to travel to DC for a workshop or to visit with the FCC. It's free. We're going to have online tools. We already have a lot of online tools, mostly made by our volunteers. Remember, we started out as an all-volunteer organization. I became the first employee. Pretty much everyone else is a volunteer with some consultants. So when it comes to people who want to do remote volunteering, some folks help with the network planning, so people can get an idea of what this would look like to cover their town or their village or their tribal lands. This is Coche de Pueblo in New Mexico, and as you can see, they can do it with 4 small cells. So we're talking $4,000. And we're not talking to cover 50% of the population to meet build-out standards. We're talking about covering everybody. I scratched my rental car a couple months ago. It cost $14,000 from State Farm. Thank you. And all I can think of is, oh my goodness, that's 3 towns. That's 3 tribal communities I could have connected. Some other things folks do, they stage equipment. We ship the equipment to their homes, and they put it all together so that once it gets to the tribal lands, it can just go up on a pole. Other things people do is technical support. They help monitor the networks and also help train up people that within the community so that they can also be their own network support eventually. So this is stuff that our volunteers do remotely. Weekend volunteers, these are the more adventurous types. These are the folks that will do site surveys. They'll go out to the sites and they'll take pictures and show me what's going on so we can make a better plan when we actually do the deployment. We have the actual deployment. This was Monday. It was really hard to get volunteers last Monday. I guess there's a holiday or something going on. So I'm the staff of the organization. This is John Rogers, one of our volunteers, and I myself. We came out to do this, and we installed this whole pole, nothing like getting a roto hammer, a little baby one, and as check-in luggage on Southwest. And we were able to put up that pole in 2 hours, and then we were able to put in the small cells to cover the town. That actually took longer because we froze. We did not dress correctly. So that was like another 4 hours. You try to terminate an Ethernet cable when your fingers aren't working. And that's something that's typical of the weekend volunteers. Here's another deployment. This is Esther Jang. This was a deployment that was done in Waimanalo, Hawaii, led by Internet Society. She's on a rooftop debugging a system to make sure to get it online. I mean, you're all good people, you all want to volunteer. She's in Hawaii, man. I do have some deployments in Alaska and Wyoming in the next couple weeks if anyone's interested. And the long-term volunteering. Folks, this is about relationship. This is about trust. Remember that it took 10 months for us to get vetted. So when it comes to these communities, we like point people. We like a face that they know, that can coordinate projects and work with us directly so that they can maintain what these goals are for these folks. They often lead up the trainings. Over there you have Ophelia Wadamahaji Corliss. and Travis Everdrick, basically taking these old SIMs off and replacing it with new outdoor CPEs for the homes that were having a harder time getting connection. You'll learn the goals of your community. You'll know the resources that we have. You can tell us what you need, and we'll start to coordinate to make sure that you can meet their needs and help them build that vision of connectivity on the lands that they want. So, engineers are wonderful. We're going to go through this outreach portion for this travel priority window, but then after that, they have 2 years to meet 50% coverage of their communities by population and 5 years to meet 80%. So that's where the builds, that's where the engineers, that's where all that is going to be needed. Anyone in here a lawyer? I'm at the wrong conference. So I need lawyers for the next couple months, and then I need you. So if you're interested, you can reach me, info@muralnet.org. We can tell you more. And to really get the backstory about what this is all about when it comes to connectivity on tribal lands, you really should talk to Matt.
He's going to talk next, but thank you.
So Mariel and Matt were again recommended to me by Tim Lee. And I just want to say that whatever volunteer opportunities that she presented, please consider it through IEEE's site that Pete spoke about in special interest groups on humanitarian technology. Portal section chair says he's already up for a site group this year. So I have signed him up whether he likes it or not because he made the mistake of talking to me. So if you have your section chairs here or back home, please go back and talk to them that you're excited. You want to come together as a section group, as a site group, and do some of these projects. And hopefully you do that so that we can support you as a region. I'm going to introduce Matt. I like the whole bio because he said, here's a short bio of mine. So this is his short version. But Matthew Rantanen is the Director of Technology of the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association and Director of the Tribal Digital Village. This is the initiative that was started in 2001, designing and deploying wireless network systems to support tribal communities. I'm going to skip a few lines and say that Matthew is of Finnish, Kringan, and Norwegian descent and has been described as the cyber warrior of community networking. He's an advocate for net neutrality, broadband for everyone, and opening more spectrum for public consumption, always looking out for the unserved and the underserved. I'm going to give more time to Matthew to talk here, and of course I can share his whole bio to everyone who's interested. Thank you, Matthew, again. I learned so much talking to you.
Okay, so I'm the sixth person to speak to you an hour and 15 minutes after lunch. Who's sleeping? Yep, there's one. All right, good. So, stretch it out a little bit. This is the last one. We're good to go. Then you get to interact and ask questions, so we should be good after that. So, that was kind of a fraction of where I've been over the last 19 years, and I also am the head of partnering in business development for a company called Arcadian Infracom, which I'll get into as well here, which is a fiber builder that builds across the United States. So, connecting tribal nations and their rural neighbors is the key to solving, the United States communication deserts that we have, and why aren't they connected? And what is middle mile fiber and why is it relevant? And how did the technology deserts come about? So I'm going to address a little bit of this. So this is essentially the fiber network in the United States, the long haul fiber network in the United States. There's some missing components. It's a few years old. And Homeland doesn't like you putting the real map up because it is a critical infrastructure, so they like to hide it. But essentially this is it. It was built 20 years ago, and it was built on the incentive of how many feet or how many miles can you put in the ground per day.
I was going to say, even for the ones where the wire is right over you, I'm down in the southern Arizona there where the cable goes literally in my driveway.
Yep.
But we can't touch it.
Exactly. So it was designed to go from east to west and north to south to support big industry and to support financial institution and the carriers. It was not designed to connect your house. It was not designed to connect your town or every one of the 573 federally recognized tribes that it passes along the way. It was designed to go fast from east to west, and it was designed to avoid every pitfall, the Grand Canyon, the Rocky Mountains, every tribe. It scooted around those things so it could get built faster. 7 networks were built about 20 years ago, and all of them did not address the local communities.
Doesn't that track the road network?
Yeah, it does a little bit, little railroad, little road. So it created what are called communication deserts. Those are the big red circles. Guess where the tribes are in the United States? In the big red circles, and all of our neighbors. So, how many missing miles of middle mile fiber to connect 573 federally recognized tribes? 8,000 miles. 8,000 miles from that grid to all the little tribes in between are missing in just the lower 48, right? So there's a big missing component to how do you connect tribes. Now, Mario mentioned that during the Obama administration, that E-Rate started to support fiber deployment. That has made a big difference for tribes. Tribes can do that middle mile component from that bigger architecture into their community and then build an end network that serves the first mile, which is the people's perspective on what they call the last mile. And so in Southern California, that little teeny circle on the bottom left-hand corner, I'm going to focus on a little bit so you can see kind of what's been done at a micro level in San Diego County and Southern Riverside County. So California has 109 of the federally recognized tribes. And the concentration of tribes that are Southern California tribal chairmen are right there. And they're spread out across San Diego County like this. And notice they're not at the beach. Well, these tribes all used to roam all of San Diego County and used to move to the beach when it was good fishing. They used to move to the mountains when it was time to get deer and the berries were ripe and things like that, and they migrated around this county, and this was all their space. And there were 3 major groups that interacted, and they broke up into smaller subgroups, families, things like that, tribes, that then got carved up by the United States government and got put in these locations at the base of the mountains where, prime real estate's the beach, so you guys get away from the beach, go out here. They happen to give mountaintops to the tribes as well as the valley. And so a lot of those mountains that you see in that photograph are owned by the tribes. So what do you do when you get lemons? You make wireless networks, right? Because you can see everything from mountaintops. Oh, is that right? Did I do that? So you're looking down into valleys from these mountaintops into these communities that are very well hidden, unless you're a satellite or a drone. And so, how do you get to these folks? Well, from those mountaintops you can see down. From the mountaintops you can see other mountaintops. And eventually then you can see where you can get access to fiber. So wireless becomes a really good problem solver in the United States for the tribal communities. Just so happens it replicates very well around the world. This is a bottom-up solution, right? This is a build it from the community, beg, borrow, and steal, volunteer, scrap together teams, tractors, parts, tools, people to make it happen. You end up with a network that looks like a bunch of sticks in the middle of nowhere, little Christmas trees. It's beautiful, it works, but it is a situation where it is very intensive, right? So Mario's built a handful of this stuff. The other colleagues we've talked about, Danae Wilson and Valerie Fasthorse have built a network. And you're scraping together funds from the federal government. You're looking for grants. You're looking for opportunity. You're looking for volunteers, because it's hard work to do this in a community that you're trying to serve, and it's not a bottomless pit of money. So it takes some time. But 5G, cellular wireless, is going to fix all our problems, right? You've heard this. Everybody in this room has heard that 5G is going to solve it all, right? Well, guess what? Remember those big holes? 5G does not backhaul to the rest of the world without fiber. If there's no fiber in those giant holes, then 5G is not going to work. So where do the tribes live? In the holes. So back to what we were doing, building out wireless networks. So these are some of the views from the mountaintops from our tower locations all throughout San Diego County. And that doesn't look like the San Diego you've seen on the brochure, I guarantee it. It's usually sunny, 70 degrees all the time. Usually bikinis and shorts involved and some surfboards. It's not. That's the beach. This is the reality. So we build things like this. We build towers. We set up communications. We train people on the ground, we train tribal community members. My team is comprised of three men in the field, 2 IT persons, and an operations director while I'm out here doing these kind of things. And only one of them is not native. The rest of them are native and most from the community. And so then you become somewhat of a solar expert because there's no power on these mountain tops. So what do? You build solar. You learn the hard way. So we look more like a solar farm in a lot of cases than we do a tower or a communications company, because the amount of equipment they're running at a tower requires quite a bit of energy. And you're working through storms and different scenarios. And I'll just say, there's no such thing as global warming. But in the 19 years I've been working in San Diego with the tribes, the storms used to last 3 days, 5 at the longest. The clouds would clear off the mountains. Now it's 7 to 10. They're farther apart, the storms, but when they come in, they sit around for way longer. We get way more precipitation. It's really bizarre. Then it goes drought in between. So it's harder to manage a solar site that needs to stay up for 7 straight days. We were very fortunate that I have a relationship with Vint Cerf, and Vint donated some money from his Google side of life and supported our tower sites with generator support to be able to charge these things back up during storms and events. So this is what the network looks like in San Diego County. It's 85 miles as the crow flies. It takes about 2 hours to drive from the beginning to the end of the network to roll a truck to deal with stuff. So we use Spectrum. Mariel talked about it. Spectrum's really important. At the bottom of this page, I have all the Spectrum that's listed on the Tribal Digital Village Network. So in the red, the 2.5 gigahertz is the educational spectrum that Mariel was talking about. The first time a tribal priority was used for Spectrum at the Federal Communications Commission was for the FM radio stations. It still exists today. It was done while I was at the Native Nations Broadband Task Force at the FCC. A very good friend and colleague of ours, Jeffrey Blackwell, was the chief of the Office of Native Affairs and Policy, and we fought tooth and nail to get a tribal priority for radio stations. So a tribe today wants an FM radio station. They can apply without an open window. They don't pay a fee. They automatically win if there's competition. This is the second time this is happening. It's being applied to educational broadcast, which is huge. It's a once in a lifetime for the tribes. Mariel has taken lead with a number of folks to force this back to the FCC and the value that it's creating for the tribes and the opportunity. This is really amazing because it is a bankable asset. Like Mariel mentioned, you can lease it, you can sell it, you can do different things with it, you can set up your own systems. So it's really important to set this precedent and get a lot of tribes to sign up and get application on this one, because if we can show that success rate, we did 35 or 40 radio stations so far out of that FM priority. If we can get into triple digits on application for an EBS Spectrum license, maybe every time they carve out a chunk of Spectrum before it goes to auction, tribes will get a shot at it.
I need at least 200. One of my grants spends at least 200
Okay, well you might have some volunteers to pick up the phone. So, this is a really cool slide because this references one of our friends, Valerie Fasthorse. This is the first time Valerie Fasthorse saw a tribal network. She came down to an FCC held event in San Diego, and we took them up to a tower, and some people from the FCC are there as well, and she's standing on a battery box. She said, "Are you kidding me? You can build this with Wi-Fi? With like 2.4? This was old school here." We're like, "Yeah, you can do that." And she went home and created a company called Red Spectrum for her tribe that makes the Tribal Digital Village project look like Tinker Toys. So this is what the network looks like in words. It serves a whole bunch of people, and it's pretty big, 650 miles of point to point. I don't know that we're counting all the home connections in that. I think it's mostly just hub and spoke stuff on the main pieces. We are actively trying to reach all 3,050 homes. We're trying to get out there so that they at least have access, so they have an option, right? And we just got connected to Scenic, which I don't know if some of you may know what Scenic is a corporation for the education network in California. It's tying us to universities and to indigenous populations through a group called Pacific Waves to the rest of the world, which is really cool. And we're connected to Scenic here. So I'm going to jump into a few quickies here. This is how we get our stuff to the top of some of our mountains. We don't use that, we use me. I'm a pack mule, Wookiee. We have to do interesting things like attaching solar panels to rocks that are hidden from wind because the wind signature is too great on a mountain that gets 100+ miles an hour wind. This tower that guy's standing on above the tree gets sideways icicles 3 feet long in San Diego. It's not in the brochure. So let me just talk about a top-down solution and then we'll close it up for questions. So the other hat that I wear, there are many. I work for Arcadian Infocom, and it is a startup company that announced itself at PTC in January last year. It is about to go back to PTC. That'll be our 1-year anniversary of being public. We were in process 2 full years as of PTC this January. We were working for the entire first year with the Navajo Nation on how to solve an issue that they had internally. And the red Y, if you will, is a network that goes from Phoenix to Salt Lake and Phoenix to Denver that supports 300 miles of fiber on the Navajo Nation that will work with their utility and regulatory groups to tie in some of their existing fiber loops and then create more opportunities for them. Also drive the price to zero, give them access to 12 strands of dark fiber, 400 gig lit services on the reservation, and a proper revenue sharing model. And we're trying to change the landscape and break the model that exists when carriers come across tribal land. We're trying to show that they're a partner, not an obstacle. So the one going left to right in the kind of the fuchsia color is Los Angeles to Dallas. So those are the 2 first announced routes. We are working with Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Apple as primary customers. Then there's a second tier of customers in that group. They want to connect their data centers, right? They want to push fast. I mean, you put a cat video on the internet and you want that dude in Russia to click, yes, I love this, within seconds. So you have to have a really robust network around the planet, including the starting point, the US, for that cat video to propagate around properly, right? So they want to connect their data centers and they want to be able to move that stuff faster. So when they do that, they don't really care where the line is drawn as long as the line gives them the speeds that they need. So having them as a customer, the money comes in, they pay for what they need, it finances the network. When you build the fiber strands, you overbuild it, so you build 288 strands of fiber in there. And my job is to work with every single small entity of people that lives across that line and say, hey, would you benefit by having access to this fiber as we come through your area? Where would you like that access? Can we put a handhold or some sort of a connection point where we can come back to you and serve this part of the community? For tribes, for small town USA, for a stoplight, I don't know, cell tower, whatever. So that is a way to solve this from the top down. So I've been building 19 years from the bottom up, and now I finally get to make some big changes, push some lines around a map, and really sort some things out on a grander scale and fill up some of these communication deserts. We do have a couple other routes in development that are not public yet, so we're looking at some of those other places. And yes, we're building in the hard places to build, where people haven't built before, because those big hyperscalers want diversity in route, diversity and option coming out of those data centers. So if they have a failure with a carrier, they have a failover with us, and they like that 3x or 4x. So opportunity to change this landscape. Obviously there's spectrum that comes up available at the Federal Communications Commission. You all have a voice. You can all speak publicly. I don't know what organization you speak from. Maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. There's a legal restriction on you that you can't talk on a public record, but as an individual you can talk. You can support things that come up for tribal when there's opportunities for new spectrum. Should we release, let's see, pick a spectrum, Mario. Should we release?
500 megahertz, get it out of AT&T's hands.
Yeah, so should we really open up 900 megahertz again because AT&T's just kind of sitting on it and not doing anything with it? Should we put that back up for auction and just say, AT&T, you had your run at it. Let's just get it back out in the public so that we can actually function in this spectrum. It's a pretty good spectrum. Let's have a tribal priority on that spectrum. So these are the kind of things that you could talk on, right?
Bidding credits for tribes specifically, not for general credits.
Yes, so there's another option, bidding credits. But so all of this comes from public record, comment in public record. FCC asks, you answer. We answer, tribes answer, you support it. That's how it'll work. So there's funding opportunities. You have some grant funding. If you see an alignment with some of the things that we've done on this panel, and we may not see that alignment because we're not you, please approach and say, you know, I think there's a thing that we do that might align perfectly with what you're doing. Then let's talk about it. Because these are some of the things, and we know where we're coming from, but we don't know exactly where you're coming from. So you may have vision that we don't have as an outsider. And volunteers, Mario nailed that one, and you know, and the solar project I think speaks highly of that one as well. So there's a lot of volunteer work there, and if you all want to get out on the ground and be volunteers, that's great. I'd love to figure out how that works in our community, and I'm more than willing to have that conversation. And I said this when I met Tim in Geneva at the IGF at the UN, and I did a closing ceremony speech, and that was my last line. So, thank you.
And I do want to get Stephanie the time that she needs, where you'll start to learn more about ethics and the program and how to actually get grouped as IEEE volunteers. But we have time for a few quick questions thanks to Stephanie's good heart. Yeah, please go ahead.
I got a couple of questions. One is, are you doing solar as being a commercial power provider in terms of large solar arrays, doing all that sun, to sell it to companies or just put it on the grid for sale as a business proposition rather than only focusing on the tribal network?
Right. Well, tribes have a variety of renewable energy goals, and some of them are quite ambitious. And so some tribes are looking to establish tribally owned utilities at utility scale generation. The work that we do is actually not that level. It's mostly single-family home applications, community solar projects, and microgrids. Most of it is grid type, but a lot of the projects we do are off-grid in remote areas, and yeah, those systems tend to be smaller in scale. But yeah.
I just want to say, I don't know if this is true, but this is a continuation of the question. So one of the things that's going to happen in the United States really, really soon is there's going to have to be storage from all this renewable energy. The utility companies are not going to do the storage. They're going to expect the storage to be at the endpoints of the homes. So are you working at that with that solution in the microgrids that you're doing, those storage solutions that can keep it off the utility grid?
It's actually a really exciting opportunity for innovation is the application of storage, and California has recently provided some rebate and incentive programs that will be very complementary to the other generation technologies that we're deploying. And so I can really see that storage is going to be a vastly growing market and opportunity, and linked technology to the generation potential as well. And so I think the future is really going to be around batteries, and we see, of course, a lot of applications of that in our off-grid systems where the storage is critically growing.